Okay, chapter 3. Now, you're going to notice that the action that takes place in the novel goes really slow, and we could just pass pages without finding anything interesting other than the description. And we said that description here is not a technique, because it does not add value to the theme, the plot, or the characters. It just gives you a sense of the setting. Now, I want you to see the page or page 36, um, line 4. So now they're having dinner together, they're eating, and Roy Luther seemed to enjoy it. Now, they haven't had a good meal in a long time, and suddenly they're enjoying a really good meal. If you remember, they took some food from the basement of Kaiser. The interesting part is that Roy Luther enjoyed it, but he didn't ask where they got it from, right? So he could have asked, where did you guys get this from? And that's why we think, or we are owed to think, that the pride he pretends to have, I don't know, it could be a little bit, um, I don't want to say false. It's not false. It's just, I don't want to say he pretends, but he doesn't mind receiving help. Like, I don't want help. I don't want money. I don't want anything. But if he gets it, he enjoys it. He doesn't ask questions about it. Now, I thought he was gradually getting better, if you can see it. Devola, Sponge bathed him daily and changed his nightshirt and bed clothing. Oh, so Devola can be depended on? The following line: the hair on his head grew long, and she, Devola, took the home barber clippers and gave him a round. She cut his hair? Isn't she supposed to be irresponsible? How can you trust her with scissors, clippers? How can you trust her to cut his hair? How can you trust her to bathe the old man? So maybe she's not useless as she was portrayed to us at the beginning, helpless, incapable. So maybe she is capable. Um, okay, last line in the same paragraph. I took my witch hazel leaves to Connell's general store. Sorry, where is it? And she took his razor to it, but complained that the blade scraped and said, when I took my witch hazel leaves to Connell's general store, could I please get her a new one if it didn't cost too much? So she can identify when something isn't working well. So she's smart. She's aware. That's one. Two, she's very considerate. Listen to this. If it didn't cost too much. So she worries about money. She worries about the budget. She worries that if something costs too much, she understands that if it costs too much, you shouldn't get it for her. So all of these indicate that Devola Luther is a smart young woman, capable of running her own house, capable of getting married. So keep that in mind when we discuss Devola's character. Now look at Romy on the following page, page 37. Third paragraph, something had flown. Something had flown out of Romy. Now he couldn't be light and careless about things, but had to know reasons and be furnished explanations. So here we notice that there is development in his character, right? And the development is shown in how he's becoming responsible. And this didn't start here. This started in the previous chapter when he wore the boots and got prepared and decided to run the family business and started to ask questions showing that he cares about the details. And again, he's developing as the young man to take over the house after his father's death. But here we notice that it started long before his father's death, so he feels responsible. Now let's look at medical line like one, two. If you look at the quotations here, you're going to find it. So I don't know yet. Don't worry about it. You keep saying that, but you are worried. No, I'm not. I'm just thinking. We have already discussed this before. She keeps saying, I'm thinking, I'm thinking, I'm thinking. And the thinking takes a long time. Now, listen to what she says. About what? Things. What things? Just things. I've got an idea, but it's hiding. I just have to give it time to come out and be recognized. You know when sometimes there's something going on your mind and you say على طرف لساني, you just don't know what it is, and this is what she means here. She means that she knows that there is an idea on her mind. She just can't grasp it. She just can't pronounce it. She can't express it. Listen to Romy, the more reasonable one. If you had an idea, you wouldn't have to wait for it to come out and be recognized. So if you have something on your mind, it's there on your mind and you can express it. You can't pretend to have an idea and just say that I don't know. I know I have an idea. I just don't know what the idea is. So he tells her that it's impossible to have an idea, just not know what the idea is. But then, she doesn't say much. Let's look at the difference between the insightful Romy versus the sightless or short-sighted Devola. Mariko. Now, they've taken the land and they have decided that it's theirs based on the papers that Kaiser signed. And they no longer work for Kaiser. So they're no longer going to they're no longer going to work for him. They're no longer going to take money from him and nothing. Now let's look at the insightful Romy, what he says. We going to work it? Sure. Come spring, we will. What with? If we're on our own people now and can't look to Kaiser fees anymore, not for anything, we won't be able to ask him for the use of his horses or his tractor or anything. What will we plan? So we know that they don't have equipment. They don't have their own machinery. They don't even have the crops. You took the land, you took the house, but what about everything else? What we've always planted, cabbage, sure. Potatoes, yes. How will we get them to the market? I don't know. I haven't figured that part out yet. So this one is a very important quotation, and I want you to highlight it. And in so many occasions, we notice that Mary Cole says she's going to do so and so, but she just doesn't know how to. She's going to bury her father, but she doesn't know how to. She's going to take care of the family, but she doesn't know how to. Now you have the land. Now you're going to farm the land. How are we gonna, say we did farm the land, we did get the crops. How are we going to get that to the market? I haven't figured that out yet. So I think we can describe her as short-sighted, and we can, to some extent, consider Romy insightful. I don't want to say mature, but more like insightful. On page 39, but in the meantime, there was this little note of an idea tucked away in some forgotten pigeonhole of mine, resting there, just waiting for whatever it would to take it back to useful life. So here we are told that she has an idea on her mind. She's thinking there's something on her mind, but she still doesn't know what it is. She still hasn't identified that idea yet. Now let's see the second paragraph. I know line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My bed suddenly turned cold, and I left it and went to the window and looked out and thought I saw something. A figure kneeling in a blur of white haze on the dark grass. Remember when we said they saw a traveler, both of them, and the traveler stayed but then never came back? And now she sees a figure kneeling in a blur of white haze on the dark grass. So is she hallucinating? Is she dreaming? Is she really awake? What's that? Who's that figure? What's that figure doing here? Could it be that she is hallucinating? That's a big question mark. So let's keep it there until we return to it. On page 40, second paragraph, 40, second paragraph. His sickness hadn't improved Kaiser's looks any. It had thinned him so that his clothes hung limp and his skin hung haggard. Do you remember when they described him as fat and said he should feel hunger? Something worse than hunger inflicted Kaiser. He became ill to the extent that he's now so thin, thinned by sickness. And it makes us wonder, like, do the kids feel better now that he's thin? I mean, class differences. This rich man is now sick, he's thin, he's like us. There's not much of a difference between us. So, does she feel better now that he's been thinned by illnesses, by the illness he's been inflicted with? Go to page 41. Second paragraph. Romy came out and said that Kaiser was in the room with Roy Luther and should he go back and listen at the door. Remember when Romy decided to steal from the basement and she said, we don't steal. Now Romy is asking for permission to go and to eavesdrop, to listen to what Kaiser and Luther are talking about. She says, I want you to highlight this. I reminded him that Luther's were not door crack listeners and sent him out to Roy Luther's garden to pick the last of the sweet corn and tomatoes. What does this tell us about Mary Cole? Despite her, despite the things we don't like about her, she is, let's say, honest to a great extent. She doesn't like stealing. She identifies stealing as stealing, and she doesn't like eavesdropping. She doesn't like listening to other people while they're talking. Page 42. We meet we meet Kaiser Pease, and we hear from him. In the previous chapters, we heard about him, very few times listened to him, but he was sick. And now this is the first time we hear him expressing himself, his own opinion, his own ideas, his own thoughts. So, page 42, second paragraph, last 4 lines. I wouldn't charge you nothing, but just having a roof over your heads ain't going to settle everything, you know. I don't suppose Roy Luther's got any money saved. We are shown a concerned friend, a person who's willing to let them live in his house in the winter. So he's not that evil. He's giving them the house for free during winter, but he tells them that, and this is what Romy said earlier, it's not enough to have a house, it's not enough to have a land. We should have a plan. And he says that it's not enough for you to have a house, not enough to have a roof. You also need to find a way to live. I said, no, he hasn't got any money saved. Kaiser took his hat off and scratched his head. Well, this one is, well, W-E-L-L, he said. That's too bad. A fellow always should lay by a little bit for a rainy day. I sure wish I knew how to advise you, Mary Paul. I sure do, but I don't. I don't know how to advise you. I don't know what I should tell you. The only thing I can think of is maybe the country people in town would help you, give you enough to live on until something else turns up. You could do that. I know a fellow over in Pumpkin Holler gets $90 a month from the country people. Told me it wasn't much of a job to talk him into doing it. So it's not difficult to go to the country people and ask for help. You can go have $90 per month or without having to do any work, and $90 would be enough for you and your family. told me if it wasn't much of a job type. Um, you're gonna have to have some help from somebody. And I want you to highlight this one. You're going to have some help from somebody. When your father dies, when winter comes, when winter is over, you will not be able to support yourself by yourself. You're young, your family doesn't have money, you don't have anything. So you should keep in mind the consideration of having help from others. I looked out across the ravaged fields and saw Romy, a vaporous figure in the distance, moving around in Roy Luther's garden. He had a gunny sack slung over one shoulder, and the bottom of this lug, but not much. Bulged, but not much. A few ears of corn and a few tomatoes, and that'll be it, I thought. And then I thought, that's been Roy Luther's whole life. So it's now, she looks at her brother working and thinking that this is the same destiny that her father has had, and she doesn't want this for her brother. A few tomatoes and a few ears of corn grown on somebody else's land from seed paid for by somebody else. And for every scrap, always having to toady and apologize, always having to say, yes, Kaiser, no, Kaiser, thank you, Kaiser, sorry, Kaiser, for what? What had we been thanking him for all this time? You don't thank people who set you in bondage and hold you there year after wretched year. You hate them. And if it isn't in you to hate as it never had been in Roy Luther, then you do second best. You pick up and get out. Oh, there's so much rage and hate in her speech. And she says, what kind of life are we having? What kind of future are we expecting? And we noticed that here she's like um she tells us something about her father, that her father was not a hateful person. He did not hate Kaiser Peace in the sense that um he didn't hate the man who paid him money, who to her made use of him. But we do see a part of her dream that you either hate the people you work for or you just take off, leave them, move on, move out, find a different life. And this tells us a lot about the psychology and mentality of people who suffer in the low class. They don't feel dignified. They feel that they are linked to people with power, to people with money. And then she says, and if that isn't possible, you start making plans to make it so. Do something, do anything, but don't just stand there and let people beat on you and then thank them for doing it. So we see again, we understand the mentality of Mary Cole. We understand her opinion, we understand her perspective. She wants to do something. And she thinks that sitting around not doing anything is wrong. And to be honest, this is something, let's say, a little bit more mature of thinking than the thinking of a 14-year-old girl. Okay? Again, Kaiser repeats, I wouldn't charge you nothing. That way you'd have a roof over your head for the winter. I'd be losing money. So basically, he would be losing money. She said that the house where they lived did not uh, was not of any use. She said that the house they lived in would not bring him any money, if you remember in the previous chapters. But now we hear it from Kaiser. He says, by letting them live there without giving him money, he would be losing money because the house is worth something. And that if he brings other people in the house and they pay him money, he would get good money. So by letting them stay there, although he's losing money, he's letting them stay there. So what does this tell us about him? If he were as horrible as she says, he would have simply kicked them all out and said, do whatever you want. You're not my responsibility. You're your father's responsibility. And we wonder why she's silent. Like so far, she hasn't said anything about the fact that he signed the papers. And we assume that she's scared. Remember when she said She pretended she was strong and powerful, and she said, I'm going to make him accept the agreement. I'm going to make him this time abide by the agreement. But the truth is, she worries that he will not acknowledge the deed. Deed here means suck, or the agreement or the contract between them. So she hasn't said anything. But now I want you to look at page 44. Second paragraph, I said the line before it. And I don't know how, and I'm scared, but here goes. So here she's scared to talk about what happened. She's afraid to tell him that there is an agreement between them. Okay, and this is the first time she expresses her true emotions. If you look at the following page, page 45, the end of the chapter, so what she says is, yes, she says, I'm going, she tells him what happened, that he was dying, that she and Devol and the other siblings decided to help him in exchange for the land and the house. So she says, I'll give you the paper under one condition. You promise you wouldn't tear it up. Without him promising, she gives him the paper. So she says, if I let you hold it while you read it, can I have your word that you won't tear it up? This is the third line on chapter 4, on page 45. Again, if I let you hold it while you read it, can I have your word that you won't tear it up? So she doesn't really trust him much. There is still lack of trust, but there is something about him that made her feel that she could trust him. And listen to this following 3 lines. So strangely it did this, as if each of us in that moment had suddenly been converted into having a respect for each other. So for a moment, both of them had respect for each other. I want you to imagine a 40-year-old man, a 14-year-old girl, both of them standing face to face, handing him the paper with trust, maybe confidence, and him showing her equal respect. But then she immediately says, it wasn't true, of course. I had no more respect for Kaiser Peace than I had for a clod of dirt. And his for me could be measured about the same. But just in that moment, for some reason not explainable, there was an unspoken exchange of respect and trust. And if we wonder why, I think one of the reasons would be it's delivered from the eyes of Mary Cole, so we don't really know how things happened. We don't really know what he felt. We don't know how Kaiser really responded, what he had in mind, but we take her word for it for now. And we could explain this alleged mutual respect for being like, it's about an important thing. It's about their life. It's about a piece of land. It's not just something that it's not a meal, right? It's not just something to eat. We're talking about a land and a house, and we're talking about an agreement that was made before his death or while he was really sick. The topic itself made or resulted in this respect, because they're talking about something that's very important. Respect had to be given at that moment. So it ended with, let me see the paper, said Kaiser without promising not to tear it up, and I handed it to him. Well, in the following chapter, we notice that he gives her the paper and he leaves. And we'll explain the chapter later. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask.